If you enjoy the subject matter of these podcasts, then you would definitely enjoy any of the 3 Patreon discussion groups that are available. You can read about these groups by going to the infinitesparkofbeing.com and clicking the participate button. I also offer a meditation group every Sunday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern. You can go to any of my social media profiles and find a link tree with that information as well. This is a community of everyday people who are interested in living with a deeper understanding of spiritual practice and how it can be applied in a practical sense to our everyday lives. So join us. Welcome to the Infinite Spark of Being podcast. My name is Keith Welsh. In this episode, we're going to be talking about messages, synchronicities. Are they real? What does it mean? But before we can really talk about it, there are a few things we need to lay out as sort of ground rules to understand this. But I'd like to start with this quote from Carl Jung. And it's very long, so I'm just paraphrasing it. But essentially, he's saying that we put 30 spokes in a wheel. It's on a bike wheel. And the emptiness of the inside of that wheel is what makes it a wheel, right? That we create a vessel out of clay, and it's the inside that's empty that makes it a vessel, that makes it useful. That we punch holes in windows. We punch holes in buildings and make windows and doors. But it's the emptiness inside of the building that is its utility, right? That the utility of a door and a window is in that there is nothing there. And essentially at the end he says, we should instead of looking at what is, we should look at what is not. The idea in Buddhism of emptiness is, when you are, in the club, and you talk to people that are fully invested in the club, they say things like, for you to totally understand emptiness, you won't know it until you're dead. And when you're dead, you're going to be confused. I don't know, whatever. But the idea of emptiness is that there is no intrinsic value in anything. And when we stand on the highest plane of consciousness as the soul, then there's no inherent or intrinsic value in air or water or any of that. It's valuable to the organism that we inhabit. You look at cars, you might drive a certain kind of a car because it suits your lifestyle. You don't need a giant truck that can pull a 53-foot boat because you don't have a 53-foot boat. There's nothing wrong with a big truck that pulls a boat, but I don't need one, right? And a person with a boat can't really drive around in a Honda Fit because they can't pull the boat. So there is this level of, it's all empty, and then the mind applies value to these phenomena, right? Even someone could say, oh, well, all people are valuable, and they really don't have value. Not everyone is valuable. You walk around a grocery store, you don't know any of those people. And you would not trade somebody that you love for one of them because you don't know them and you love this person. So it's that, right? Those of you that believe that all human beings are valuable, but yet you continually vote in a system that keeps putting our own war criminals into office, something to think about. So there's no intrinsic value, and that from the highest plane of, I'll go ahead and close this, I think it's making noise. But from the highest plane of consciousness, there's no value, so we see that emptiness. The next thing we have to look at is objective and subjective. So objectivity cannot involve preferences, opinions, or tastes. Subjectivity is opinions, preferences, and tastes. So we start to look at all of these things, and we realize that we live on this planet that is, in a lot of ways, the phenomena that we experience and the aspects of it that we interact with are kind of valueless, objectively. There's subjective value, though. So when we're talking about synchronicities, a synchronicity is an event that really only means something to the observer. Say a certain series of numbers to you is confirmation that everything's going to be okay, and it's God letting you know that it's going to be okay. Let's say you see a rainbow, and that is, a signal to you that God's letting you know everything's going to be okay. If you see these 4 numbers, 3 numbers, whatever, right? And, a lot of people will do a lot of backbending and gymnastics in order to find some objective reality in these things, like the number 108. You Google why the number 108 is important, and you get all manner of whatever. And the number 108 is very important to me, but I don't need to have an objective reason why it's important and why you should all understand why it's important. I don't require that. Like I've said before, a belief is a non-quantifiable thought exercise, right? And beliefs are great, they're fine. You get into a problem when you need the belief to be true. And worse, you need it to be true for everybody else, right? So let's look at something like love. If I love you, it's not that you are giving me something. I'm not acquiring it from you. You are the key that turns on the thing in me that is love. So a series of numbers that is a signal from God telling you that everything's going to be okay is the key that turns on the thing in you that is connected part and parcel inextricably to God, the thing that reminds you of God, the thing that reminds you that this is all okay. And for a lot of people that feels dismissive, or it feels like you're taking the magic out, but you're not. The magic of the earthly plane is that it is subjective, and that the experience is malleable, that you don't have to have the experience that you're prescribed by the culture. There's a number of synchronicities in my life, right? A lot of them have to do with lights, and I've had visions of lights, I've seen lights, I've had meditative experiences with lights. It's all of these lights, but it's white light. And, I told this story about going to my mother and father's house. A different couple owned it. There's a party out there for one of my dad's friends. It was his 80th birthday party. And Christy and I are walking around. It's a big stilt house with a wraparound porch. And my parents lived there for 23 years. I'm very familiar with the house and how it works and how my dad built it. And I know that all of the lights on the back side of the house are on one switch. And when we were walking around the back of the house, I was just showing it to Christy. We didn't go in, obviously, though I have been in it since this couple owned it. They're very nice people. And I get to the window of my parents' bedroom, and it's the room where my dad dropped his body. And I said, my dad died here. And I was in front of the window, and there's a light. There was a light behind me by the window, like that kind of went over the window, and it flickered. It was off, and it flickered. All the lights were off, and the one light flickered. She goes, "Did you see that?" And I kind of saw it out of the corner of my eye. I turned around, and she goes, "That light just flickered." And then it flickered again, and then it was out. And that was it. Now, you could have an electrician come and explain to me about surges in electricity and all this kind of stuff, but, that's interesting. And then there was, when we were looking at the community where we live now, I'm in the car, and we just pulled in to check it out. The sky's about to absolutely open up, about to rain really hard. Christy gets out, she's standing under this light, and she goes, "This is meant to be." And right then, this light that was off flickered. Okay. There's a light in our carport that is always steady and always on. But there's days that Christy waves to it, and it flickers. Now, the one at my parents' house, very strange. Even the one outside, very strange. The carport, admittedly iffy, but strange. Now, There's other people in our online groups that have had, anomalous activity around lights. And you could have an electrician come in and like look at everything. And they could say, oh, well, what's happening is this. But it won't happen while they're there. But they'll tell you what phenomena with electricity would cause it to do that. Okay, but is that what happened then? Recently I had that event where one night I saw 12 moving lights, and I was telling a friend of mine, he's like, that's crazy. He goes, there's a lot of stuff out there. And then he sent me a thing about satellites. I was like, well, it's interesting. And he goes, it's Occam's razor. What is the most likely explanation is probably the truth. When it comes to those lights in the sky, if you live in a world where there are no anomalous lights in the sky, then the natural, it would have to be, well, that's satellites. 12 in one night. 12 satellites in one night in different directions. That's strange. And then the next night, more. The night after that, more. And then there's a quiet night. And now it's like, we see these things from time to time. And you could say, well, maybe those are the satellites. But the night there's 12? Then there was the event in Geneva, Florida, where we went to Casa Dega and spoke with Reverend Margaret Schmidt. And we stayed in this yurt on this large piece of property called Danville. We did Dr. Stephen Greer's CE5 protocol, and then had the craziest night ever. And I saw a giant white orb in the woods. I mean, I'm laying in this yurt and it sounds like all hell is breaking loose outside. And you could say, oh, well, when I finally went outside, like, what in the fuck is happening? It was dead quiet. And it was a windy night before that. And then suddenly it's not. You could say a lot of things. It wasn't windy like this. So these are all synchronicities. And you can always find some completely materialistic reason for them.
If you believe that you would benefit from working with me one-on-one on anxiety, ruminating thinking, grief and loss, or stress management, then shoot me an email or a direct message. Or if you're interested in learning about how meditation and spiritual practice can transform your reality and in turn change your life, then again, please reach out through email or direct message. Thank you.
Of materialism and spirituality. And someone says, well, it's Occam's razor. Well, that Occam's razor depends on, like, what is the most rational or common thing. But if you're somebody who's surrounded by unusual activity all the time, then Occam's razor doesn't really work. But the point is that these synchronicities are breadcrumbs. They're messages. I'm reading a book right now, and the author made a really interesting point. Because, if you want to wake somebody up, you don't just yell at them. First, you whisper. You wake them up slowly. You start to whisper to them, and you get a little louder, a little louder. And a lot of us engage in these spiritual practices and live these lives where these practices are the focal point, and that the way we think, our philosophical point of view has changed, and we now look for certain things to be true. And you might say, well, nothing's changing, nothing's happening. And are you sure? Or is it that you're so noisy that, like, you can't hear the whisper? You don't notice the slight wave, the little wink that God gives you. But you start looking for it and you see it. And once I saw these 3 lights in the sky moving over a building, I came home and I told my ex-girlfriend, I was like, oh my God, I just saw these 3. And she goes, well, it's probably because you were looking for it. Okay. To find what you're looking for is now, that's, what are you saying? Yeah, I was looking for it and I saw it. If you look for the breadcrumbs, you'll find them. It's like when you're working with manifestation, the law of attraction. You know, Florence Scovel Shinn talks a lot about the olive branch. So sailors, I guess, and Noah would send a bird out, and if the bird came back with like a branch or something, it was a sign of land. It wasn't land itself, but it was a sign that, like, hey, land is nearby. And we get these little things, these whispers, these little hellos from the universe, you know, from God. And if we're noisy, if we're cluttered in our mind, we don't see them. You know, it's back to the divine mind. You know, you have to get quiet to hear it. And you have to be aware to notice things, to see things. You have to look for them. And part of that looking is with faith, you know. But synchronicities and these messages are inherently empty. Everything is. But they are keys that turn on the thing in you that is connected to God. There are these things that let you know that you do in fact live in a magical world. That this planet, this place where we live, this plane of consciousness is magic. It's all around us. You know, there's a lot of unexplainable things. You know, I watched a really interesting documentary last night about the Bradshaw Ranch in Sedona. They're using these SLS cameras, and yeah, I downloaded an SLS app for my phone. I'm playing around with it. If you don't know what it is, just look it up. And it finds human shapes and stuff, and depending on the intensity, it was showing like strange shapes in my, and this is what was weird, right? So the default setting, I pointed at Christy and it's like, oh, look, there's a human body, right? But then there was, I noticed there's an intensity thing. So I was watching this show and they're like, oh, look, there's a humanoid shape or figure up in the rafters of this old barn, which is very interesting because it was shaped like a person. And I started thinking, you know, as much as I believe in things and want things to be true, I'm a skeptic. I try to stay skeptical because I want the truth. I'm not cynical, I'm skeptical. I'm curious, right? Because if you want the truth, then you want to be a little skeptical. So I'm like, maybe this thing just finds length and shapes and joints and then creates a, you know, an image or whatever. So I download this app. And at the normal intensity, I pointed at Christy, oh, look, there's a person. She points at me, oh, look, there's a person. I notice there's an intensity. I turn it up. And there's my great-grandmother's rocking chair in the room. There is this dog bed that Kevin uses, our dog Kevin, but it used to belong to Hamilton, her old dog. And there's another chair that I could see that, you know, so I pointed all three of these things. I get no reading for anything else in the room except for the rocking chair and the dog bed. Granted, it didn't look like a human shape sitting in the chair or anything like that, but it was very strange. It's very strange that it only picked up something on the only two objects in the room that have a lot of deep meaning and were associated with a physical body that we loved very much. Very interesting. Anyway, but you can look at those as synchronicities. These things are, but if I'm looking for objective truth, objective reality, I don't think that's going to benefit me. You know, I think that people get caught up in trying to make things, you know, solid and you know, objective. And like Buddha would say that the the mind is the source of suffering, because the mind tries to make things very fixed, solid, and in place at all times. And I think when we get caught in trying to find objective reality in the spiritual world, I think that we cut ourselves off from the real magic. That's when the default mode network in our brain is really kicking, and we only look at things through a certain lens, when maybe we need an imaginative, broad lens. It doesn't mean that those things aren't real. It doesn't mean that the synchronicities aren't, maybe that's the way God speaks to you, right? Like my beads and my japa bag and these things mean nothing to you. It means something to me. That's what God uses to speak to me, because that's how I'm set up. I'm set up for that thing. You know, and it's easy to poo-poo these things and write them off and whatever, but I don't know, man. I mean, you're here, right? You're on Earth, you're living this life. If you're listening to this podcast, you obviously have some sort of propensity towards spirituality or paranormal this or self-improvement that. All of those things require this openness, because if we look for these like objective truths within spirituality, we don't leave room for the miracle. We don't leave room for the surprise. You know, if we need tarot cards to absolutely be real, and we need this thing to be real and that thing to be real, I don't think that's helpful to us. I think part of the spiritual path is that you broaden your perspective, you know, and you do it in a way that allows you to see the miracles, to see the magic of life. I think that's what it is. I think that there is a lot of magic in this world. You know, like seeing that light flicker at my parents' house. You'd say a lot of things about that. Somebody was saying hello to me. Maybe it was my dad. I know he loved that land. You know, my mom, it's interesting. My mom lived there for 10 years after he died. And that plot of land was the hub for a lot of friends and family and holidays, and everybody just went out there. They had it was like 7 or 5 acres. I don't remember in the end what it was, but it was a good chunk of land, and people come out and we'd have cookouts and barbecues and, you know, all this stuff. And, you know, after my dad died, my mom said that she would see him on the porch. You know, and being the person I am and being interested in things I'm interested in, I was curious, and I said, "You mean like you can imagine him out there?" She goes, "No, I can see him." I go, "Are you awake when you see that?" She's like, "Yep." She goes, "I look right out there and I see him standing right there," and she pointed at this corner on the porch. It's where you know, you could stand and like look out at the water. And I don't know if that's some place he stood often, but I mean, he was under the house working and messing around most of the time. It was a big still house, like I said, but she would see that. And, you know, a psychologist or whatever could come in and say a lot of things. You could poo-poo it and say, "Well, you just want to see your husband." Yeah. Yeah, she does. She did. She did want to see him, and so she did. And that meant a lot to her. And eventually she stopped seeing him out there, and, you know, she was convinced that the reason she was seeing him was because she was going to die soon. I think she saw him because he was very connected to that land. You know, I think that was, you know, it's hard to explain in a, you know, in doing this as to how important this property was to him. But, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if he was still out there, you know. He was out there, you know, hanging out. It's a nice couple that lives out there. I think they're a little younger than me. If you want to see it, you will. You know, we had a lot of interesting experiences, Christy and I. Believe that we're both so open that we kind of magnify everything. You know, we supercharge it. A lot of unexplainable costs going away, and things changing. And what's been very interesting is like, it's allowed me to stay so open. It's like, I don't know what's going to happen. I have no idea, because miracles happen all the time. My favorite part of that Florence Scovel Shinn prayer, miracle will follow miracle and wonders will never cease. And if you stay open to it, you know, it's like, I worked with a lot of addicts in my life, alcoholics, and in AA they would say, you know, it's a life beyond your wildest dreams. And when you think about miracles, you think about the idea of like something beyond your wildest dreams. Your ego goes big every time. Big. It doesn't go small. Because that small stuff, that's beyond your wildest dreams. Miracles happen in the smallest, slightest, tiniest ways. They're whispers. It is a whisper. And to wake someone up, you don't shout, you whisper. At least you start whispering. And that's what the phenomena, whether it's the paranormal or God or what words we're using to describe this thing, it's whispers. You know, it's like, recently I was with some folks and they said, oh, well, nothing ever happens on that Skinwalker Ranch series. But I know for a fact that, like, I haven't watched it that much, but I know a lot about Skinwalker Ranch. And I know that they measure things all the time. You know, Bigelow Aerospace owned it at one point. The government owned it at one point. You know, they study things out there, and it's the weird little anomalous activity. It's like yesterday watching the documentary about the Bradshaw Ranch. Thermal cameras, little Tesla coils, things like that, like show that there's something happening here. There's a verse in the Bible, I mean, Jesus said it or somebody, that if you had faith, we wouldn't need all these miracles. If you had faith in the magic of life, you wouldn't need all these miracles. It would all just be miracles. You know, but it's whispers. It's whispers, and it's slight movement. It's little things. And look for the signs in the everyday life. And don't need to prove it. Stop requiring proof. Just stop. Just enjoy. Hear the messages. Notice the whispers. Notice the little hellos. The signs are everywhere. It's happening all the time. And I don't mean that like a schizophrenic way. I mean in a perfectly rational and sane way. Right? Anyway. I love you. I love you. I love you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And we will talk soon. Bye.
If you enjoy this content and would like to support the further creation of this content, go to the website theinfinitesparkofbeing.com. There you can explore the many ways you can do that. Also, click the About button, read a little bit about me, see what I have to offer you in terms of one-on-one sessions. And while you're at it, don't forget to check out the Patreon tiers. We are building a spiritual community of everyday people with not so everyday interests. So go ahead and check out the participate button on the website and join us.